Hello adventurers, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are in Yuma, Arizona, and we are about to go to the Yuma Territorial Prison. I know it sounds a little weird, but it's super cool. We've been here before a long time ago, so now let's go back for a new adventure. Now I came here I want to say 5 years ago probably, and a lot has changed since I was here. Like this entire entryway area, super cool, lots of information, and they now have these signs talking about the wetlands below, which you can actually access through this parking lot right here. In fact, whenever you turn into the parking lot, there's a little space that goes straight down to that area. You see the parking? There's a nice outdoor trail system with lots of cool little stops. Super intriguing. We might have to do that in the future. But along here you can actually find signs that tell you about what you're looking at and also have historic photos to go along with it. So I haven't even made it inside yet and I'm already super blown away. This is really cool. Okay, so we made it and we're about to go inside. It is $8 to actually physically go and explore as an adult, and so we got our money ready. Also, from place to place in Arizona, I've been noticing some places enforce masks, some don't, so just come prepared just in case. Just saying. Okay guys, so we did pick up our self-guided tour map and we have kind of a plan of action here. This place is really neat for a lot of reasons, and that will kind of start to unfold as we walk around and check out some of the different buildings. But our first stop here is actually going to be the viewing deck, which is literally right over here. Isn't this neat? Now the cool thing about the view deck is it's labeled as number 1. So when we look at our little piece of paper here, it actually tells us what we're seeing. So on the self-guided tour, we have a really great understanding of what it is that's in front of us instead of just saying, oh, that's a pretty bridge. So let me tell you more. So what we see in front of us is actually the Colorado River, and then also there are the granite outcroppings areas. This is the bridge right here that is actually still used by the Union Pacific Railroad, and it opened originally in 1915. In addition to our self-guided tour, there's also these kind of signs right here, which are fascinating, and you can see some of the actual photos of whenever they used this as an actual transport area. So this right here is the Colorado River, and you can see that they have these paddle wheels that are actually going down the river to deliver things, and it's just so cool looking. But also it shows right here kind of a reference as to what that would have looked like, and it looks like right here that these bridges at the first iteration actually opened up for these big boats. Now I have no idea how this one would do that. I don't think it can. I think this one is just super solid, but wow, super cool history, guys, and we've only made it to stop 1. Let's keep going. Now from the vantage point that we just stood at, this is across the river from that. So what we were looking at, this is a view from there. And this was Yuma in the 1870s. This is what you might have seen looking over at the prison. It was much different than it looks like now, where there's only a few standing buildings. But look at this. You can see several different aspects. Like for example, over here, the pump station, and then the guards' quarters, and then the main guard tower. Now the main guard tower does stand today, and we'll be going in that in just a little bit. But for the most part, the vast majority of all of this is kind of changed. It does not look the same. There are a few remaining pieces that we'll go through, but this is what it started out looking like. And another historic photo right here, this is the offices and also the guard quarters. Very different than what we're seeing when we look out here today. Yeah. History has taken its toll on this location, just like it has a lot of others, but the preservation that they have managed to find in some of these buildings is fascinating. So now that we have a little bit of a better understanding as to what we're looking at, now we're going to go explore what is physically here. And that's the really cool part. Without having all of those structures, you would think that we would lose a little bit of the history, but they have worked really hard here to keep it intact through a variety of different ways, starting with this little path that we're actually on. We're about to see a line of stones that tells the story of the Yuma Territorial Prison. Now, each one of these stones tells a little bit different story along the timeline, but it has a variety of different dates that are available for us to kind of learn with. For example, in 1875, the prison authorized by territorial legislature, and it actually opened in 1876 as a result. So that's where the story of this location begins, but that's only one of the stones leading up to more present day. It shows that in 1882 the guard tower was actually built, and it was in 1884 that they actually brought in electricity. So for several years they functioned without electricity. Moving on, we see that they actually had a riot at one point in time and 4 convicts died. It was in 1887. So about 10 years after its origin, there was that. Women were actually added to the cells in 1891. And as you continue reading down, you'll see a little bit more. Now, some of the names that are mentioned here, like Pearl Hart, sentenced to 5 years for robbery, this will come into play whenever we move into the next building. Now, along the trail of different kinds of important events, you'll also find words like dark cell, and you'll find things like maximum security. Those actually were held here too, but they were far different than the things we think of with solitaire and maximum security now. It was a very different time then, guys. But at some point, this no longer continued to be a prison, and it continued to be a building that was important to the community. That happened around 1909. In fact, at that point, the prison closed. So after a very short run, it then later went on to become a school for a while. But that's only the beginning. After the school took over, a few additional things started to happen. For example, the prison buildings were actually used to rebuild Yuma after the flood. They also knocked down a portion of it for the very railroad that we see right over here. The 1920s and 30s were a bit hard here, like they were in a lot of other places. There was a fire. They also used this as a guard quarters for a while, but then they had to evict some squatters because they had basically taken over. You get into the 40s, and that's when the museum aspect of this started to take place and started to become something. So that is the brief story of the Yuma Territorial Prison. But now it's time for us to get a little bit more in depth, and remembering some of those trigger words, we're going to see what that might have looked like in real life land. In fact, we are entering into the very area that there was a riot near the gates. Remember, 4 died in this riot. Now, we are in the section that originally this would have happened, and during the incident, 7 inmates tried to escape. 4 ended up dying, 2 were recaptured, and 1 was wounded. So a lot of action happened in a very short amount of time. And it all happened as a result of them trying to storm this very gate behind me right here. It didn't go so well though, guys. Last time I was here, there was actually a reenactment where a man was telling about the incident in full regalia. He was just going in and talking about it. It was super, super cool. Now, they do still offer that from time to time on tours, and if you happen to come through and can pick up on one of those, I highly recommend it. It was fabulous. The section we were just in is called the Sallyport. We are now moving into the museum and theater. And when I was here last time, the theater wasn't showing anything, but today it is. Okay, so I moved inside. I'm a little crazy looking, but that's okay. The video is actually quite good. I have seen this one before. It's fabulous. When you come, you need to watch it. It's so, so good. It explains everything and kind of has some of those trigger words in it so you'll understand what they mean, like the dark cell, for example. Did you know it is actually rated amongst one of the most haunted places in the United States? Wild, right? Anyway, let's look around the museum and I'll show you some of the things that I personally was drawn to the last time I was here and some of the things that you might enjoy when you come. Along the outer wall, you'll find a grouping of different photos. These are all the superintendents of the property, and it shows how long they served and then also what kind of work that they did while they were here. And it's kind of fascinating to read through some of these. Let me show you. This guy right here actually established a visitor's fee of 25 cents to build the prison library. Or like this guy, his time here was very short-lived. He resigned after only 1 month. This guy right here was responsible for the female living quarters here at the prison. And then when we get down to this one, he actually was responsible for moving many of the inmates to a different facility. And he was one of the original Roosevelt Rough Riders. So see, we're just scratching the surface and it's already having a lot of layers. So it's pretty cool. But in each one of these cases also, there were a lot of different like artifacts and things that might have been associated with the people or even just the place. So some of these things are wild. And let's also not forget to look at these very large banners that are all around the room with some of the many convicts. The convicts are the real story here. This guy right here is referred to as the Mormon prisoner, and his name was William Jordan Flake. As you read down the sign, it shows that he was actually a pioneer in 1877, but in 1884, he was in fact arrested for plural marriage. While many were fleeing to Mexico to avoid the prosecution, he stuck it out and challenged it and ended up serving 6 months in prison. Known as the bookkeeper, R.L. McDonald actually was a Phoenix School superintendent. He was later sentenced to prison for the crime of forgery. But the banners don't tell the whole story. Below the banners, you'll find a series of various mugshots with many of the different prisoners, and they're grouped into very interesting categories, like these and these. Along with the mugshots, you find leg irons, some different kinds of tools and weapons, some different things that were used inside of the prison. And the mugshots that they took were quite different. Notice there's a mirror behind them so you could see the side and back. In addition, in this section, this is new since I was here last, this is an interactive exhibit, and it actually talks about the Mormon prisoners, just all of the Mormon prisoners, and kind of what happened and how they perceived it. And it's an interactive piece that you can literally press and go through several pages. This is Jose Maria Redondo, and he was considered to be a great entrepreneur of ranching and farming. The territorial legislator brought the prison to Yuma. He ended up becoming the mayor of Yuma and later died of smallpox. When we learn about the father right here, we learn that he also died very young, and potentially that was karma for the bad stuff that happened here. This place was called Hell on Earth, or a hellhole, and it was because of the way that people were physically treated and also mentally treated. I know that the prison system is not without error even today, but then it was really, really, really bad. And as we kind of go through this area right here, it talks a little bit more about that. It says that prisoners actually feared and loathed this prison. They thought it was insufferable because of the heat. It made it into an inferno, especially during the summer months. It was surrounded by rivers, which had quicksand and desert in all directions, and they called it an inhuman snake den with a ball and chain as a standard punishment. Here at the prison, tuberculosis was the #1 killer, and it was impossible to endure, more impossible to escape. Now, despite it being so terrible, it was still considered to be, at one point, after some renovations were done, quite posh, if you can believe that. Prisoners were said to be kind of filed in and could be placed into a cell with up to 5 other humans. However, some humanitarian efforts happened, and as a result, the prison deemed some quite interesting honors. Those humanitarian efforts went on to become the country club on the Colorado, because the prison ended up with all these amenities despite it not really benefiting all of the inmates. For example, they had electricity and sanitation, including 2 bathtubs and 3 showers. They had a massive library thanks to the effort of one of the superintendents, and it included up to 2,000 different books. So what made this possible? Well, on this side you see the country club aspect, and on this side you see the hellhole aspect, and it is vastly different. It is not ironic that they used tombstones to dictate how the hellhole aspect of this worked. In fact, death was infrequent, but at the same time, convicts typically who died in a pretty miserable way. Yuma stemmed on the overall isolationism of their location, because since they were surrounded by water or the desert, it was near impossible for people to actually escape. The dark cell became known as one of the most inhumane punishments that Yuma had to offer. They would basically take everything away from you, including your clothes, and put you into this small dark room and leave you there like solitaire. Now in a few minutes we'll go check out what that dark cell actually looks like in person, but just the describing factors of it. It has one narrow light that can beam through only during portions of the day. It was never cleaned, so it smelt of human everything, just gross. And you were in there for who knows how long. Whenever they'd put you in, it was up to them as to when they wanted to take you out. And they didn't always just give you an amount of days. They would sometimes just say go, and you were there. And then comes the country club aspect. Incandescent lights like these were actually used in the electrical power system. A phone like this was installed, and the line was connected to the prison from the South Pacific Railroad Depot. Instruments like these, games, things like this, all were visually seen as to belonging to the prison. At one point, they even had their own band. And at one point, it was even said that the cells were kept immaculately clean and that everything was just fine, despite having 2 very different versions of reality existing at exactly the same time. And I think that that goes to talk about the thing that happens even in today. A lot of times we want to see the glossy side, not the ugly side, so they painted a really beautiful picture, despite the fact that it wasn't so beautiful in reality. Remember those mugshots we were talking about? Right here, you can take your own mugshot, and we're gonna hope that this is the only mugshot we get. Just this one, this fake one right here. Hi! Yeah, we don't need a real mugshot on this trip, guys. As we come over to this side, we see some of the women of Yuma. And this is actually Pearl Hart, who we saw mentioned on the sign outside. She was called the Bandit Queen. She, along with Joe Boot, robbed the globe to Florence Stagecoach. She became a media sensation, even with media way back in the day, and she was sentenced to 5 years in Yuma. This is the shotgun sister herself, Maria Marino. Alfred Marino, age 15, did not like the way that his sister Maria, age 16, was dancing, and he told her to stop. She threatened to kill him, and he said, okay, cool, go for it. So she got a shotgun and she went to shoot him, and in fact did kill her brother. This is Elena Estrada, and she was considered to be the heartbreaker. Her crime was one of passion, some would say. She was sentenced to 7 years for manslaughter when she stabbed her unfaithful lover. But these women behind us are just the start of an entire Bad Girls of the West section, where you can find all of these women over here and their stories, which are wild. In fact, did you know that you could be sentenced to prison just for not doing what you were told as a woman? just like in doing regular things or dancing. Oh no, heaven forbid, dancing. Not saying that Miss Kate Nelson actually didn't commit adultery, but adultery then was also considered to be encompassing flirtation. And so, yeah, there's a lot of adulterers in here who probably didn't actually do anything near as bad as it sounds. In fact, we have learned at many of the places that we have explored the Wild West through that women could be locked up for even insubordination of her husband's will. Crazy, right? The world has changed so much, yet we still have so far to go. But this section is absolutely fascinating. I encourage you guys to come out here and check it out for yourself. Read all the little captions. They're so wild, but very, very good. And as we go through this section, there's also another one of those touchscreens. In fact, the list of women who were here, fascinating. 29 different females were sentenced to the Yuma Territorial Prison. And you can see here, adultery, felony just in general, no specifics, receiving stolen goods, even selling liquor to the Indians. And if you do want to find out more about the women, this is that touchscreen we were just talking about. It has a bio for each one of them, tells a little bit of the information. For example, Ada Parks was actually accused of stealing $31.11, and she ended up with a massive sentence. And then here's another one. This one, she was actually slashing Bill Hennessy 6 times with a knife because she was drunk. This one right here was only 21 years old. Oh my goodness. We talked about the Humanitarian Projects. Well, this is one of the women who actually was a part of that. This is Medora Ingalls, and she thought that the prisoners needed more. They needed something. They needed something to help them with getting back out and doing something positive in their lives. So she started introducing these different things. She was an advocate for the prison library, and then also for several of the other things that we see in the more modern country club version of the prison. Now, her efforts didn't just come out of nowhere. She was actually one of the superintendent's wives, and that's why she was able to actually impact change. She was already in it. So it wasn't like a random person just saying, here, let me fix your problem. She was physically seeing what these people were needing at the time that they were serving, and she was desperately trying to make a difference. Now, while we're visiting, there's also a screen that shows all of the different scenes that have actually been filmed here at the Territorial Prison and around the area. It's pretty cool. They have tons of different kinds of scenes going through here, and it's very fascinating. Believe it or not, Yuma has adopted the full-on criminal mentality and actually has deemed some of their team names the Yuma High Criminals. So this is actually a case with just some of those different things throughout the years. Now, at one point in time, like we were reading on the timeline, the prison was kind of just abandoned. It was no longer serving as a prison, and pieces of it were literally torn off to build the new railroad bridge. But what kind of flipped the switch for them turning this into a positive location once again? It was the rebuilding. The rebuilding was important. They knew it had historic value, and they wanted to preserve that and share that. So the beginning of all of this started at a very specific time. At the time that they started this project, it looked very different than it even does today because the place was in such disarray. It was right after September 29, 1939, that they decided that this was the time they were going to convert this into a historical park and museum. They first had to get rid of anyone who happened to be in the way, which happened to be the hobos who were just kind of homesteading it on their own and calling it home. But then the projects started to begin. And this is what it might have looked like at that time as they were starting those projects initially. Now, from that point to this point, a lot has changed. There have been a lot of different projects that have been ongoing, and even coming in today, I've noticed that there's changes, and I think that that's fabulous. This place is absolutely amazing to come out and see actually in its entirety, because the buildings that they have preserved are real life buildings that actually stood a purpose at one point in time. A lot of times whenever we look at historic buildings, it's just a flat slab, kind of like what I'm standing on right now. There's not much to it left. But here they wanted to make sure that those buildings could tell their story and that story could continue onward. And I think that's fabulous. So now we're gonna go look at the actual cells. Yeah, they're still here, guys, and they're quite crazy looking. Now throughout this section you can actually go into each cell and kind of look in to see what you can find. And some of them have little plaques on them and they tell a little bit more about the people who might have been in here. Again, an expansion on what they have inside, but really fascinating because some of them actually talk to you, like this one over here when you get close. Fabulous. I love that. That wasn't here either. So this is why you circle back and go to places a second time. There is one thing though. This guy right here. He had the death penalty and don't know if you could see that, but there's definitely a snake on his sign. We're moving on. This is why the signs are important. This talks more about the Great Escape that we talked about earlier. And you can actually find the names of each one of the inmates and also what they were serving for and how far into their sentence they were. And it talks a little bit more about the account down at the bottom. So definitely read all of the signs. While you're walking through this area, remember, they said that it was super, super hot, especially during the summer. You can look through the cells and see that there is physically a door between two sets of cells. But there could be up to 5 people in each section. So 10 people, that would make no breezeway. So even though right now while I'm standing in this cooler area, it feels okay, I can't imagine standing here during summer and not just like baking to bits. And then inside of these, it would be even worse. It's kind of funny they say this is low clearance because I'm almost positive, yep, I can stand. I can stand. That wasn't that bad. Low clearance just means under 5'7", that's all. Now the low clearance section actually leads us to this big open space, and this was considered to be the new yard. It was constructed in the 1900s, and it was actually 119 feet by 84 feet. And they put this here to help with some of the overcrowding issues. They had pretty much outgrown the space because they weren't expecting it to be as popular as it was. Now I don't know you can necessarily call a prison popular, but they did refer to it as that, which is wild to me. But yeah, this is the new yard, and you can see over here some of the cells actually face out toward the yard right here. The cells here are a little bit different, and as you can see here, they don't look to have a pass-through like the others. It's just one room. But this is where they were said that more of the homeless people ended up during the Great Depression, in these rows right here, because of breaches to the wall. The library at one point in time had over 2,000 books, and it looked like this. There were shelves in this small area. You could see that they had paper where people could actually physically write, and you could also do a lot of different things in this area. Kind of cool, right? Well, whenever they had to build the second yard though, this space actually was somewhat cannibalized for the extra yard. And so they lost a little bit of room, but they still had what the majority of this room right here would be. So not too bad, but again, it wasn't really a country club. They just had a few nice things. Okay, it's time. We're going into the dark cell. Now remember, the dark cell only had a small glint of light that would make its way into the actual room. People didn't know how long they were going to be put there, and this is also the most haunted attraction in the United States, according to some surveys. So we're going to go inside. I'm going to run both cameras, see if we pick up on anything. There have been reports that people have heard voices, get cold touches, or even see things in their camera. I don't know if that's going to be our journey today, but we're going to find out, and this should be interesting. Okay, here we go. This is going to be dark. Don't know if you guys will be able to see me or not, but I'm kind of filming both ways. Oh, it is dark in here. Wow. That is crazy. It's very hard to see where the walls even are in this place. And That is wild. Can't say that I would want to spend a lot of time in there. Very hard to see. Very, very hard to see. And also, it does kind of give you this like overwhelming sense of dread when you're in there. Like, I was just filming and I showed you everything, but it feels like a very heavy room. And I'm not even a person who's like into that kind of stuff like that, but that was kind of heavy. Even the infirmary is in the middle of this rockiness. It's kind of weird. You would normally think that an infirmary would be in like a actual physical building, but it's actually part of this rocky structure, which isn't the same as a normal building would be, but it's very cool. Actually, it keeps them a little bit more cool inside. And here you can see the second room where there's 2 people here, but they have a guitar. Huh. And just to kind of give you a better idea of what I'm talking about the rocky building, this is kind of what it looks like. And this is almost like a form of adobe. It's very strange. It's almost like a mixed concrete, but it's using the elements that are around us, and it has these little textures of rocks. So that's what you're looking at on the interior of each of these rooms. If you recall earlier, we saw a bunch of different prisoners that were lumped into different groups. This was the incorrigible ward. The incorrigible ward was unlike any of the other areas that we've seen so far. In fact, it was built of steel cages, very similar to this one. Now, supposedly they were going to use these and then kind of do something similar to this with that. And they had a whole budget for the project. However, it was noted that the cages themselves were taken to a different place and used as a result. I bet that they had a little bit more sun coverage than this. This would be miserable. This would be that literal hell house that they were talking about. Yeah, Arizona, 110 degrees in the summer, no big deal, right? This bell was cast in 1875. It stood 3 feet tall, and it was 800 pounds. This was the official bell of the prison. And that bell would have sat right here on the roof. It's highlighted in this photo, and it would have been the main alarm system for if something was going awry. Now, like everything else here, this bell actually has a cool story. It sat at the prison, kind of abandoned for a while, and then finally a church took it in. A church used this as a joyous sound of bringing people into their community for their worship services for 23 years before returning it to the prison for the museum. And I think that that's fabulous. The bell started out as like this doom and gloom thing, and then it turned into a super positive thing, and now it reflects on that really cool history and has a place right here in the yard with this sign that tells us its whole life. We're off to the guard tower. Okay guys, here it is. This place is huge. You can actually have up to 49 people for the capacity, so that should tell you it's rather large and in charge. They also have a few things I'm going to show you, some places that we can read some signs, look at some stuff. Oh my goodness, there's a lot going on. Let's go. On the signs up here, we learn about the flooding, and you can actually see a pretty good viewpoint in this photo right now of how far that the river was out of its bounds. The river, of course, is right in front of us right now. So there it is, and you can see that it is well inside of its bounds, but whenever that photo was taken, it would have come all the way up to this area that our path below us is, and probably over to that far road over there at least. In addition, up here you can find some other photos. That is a guard in front of the guard tower, and then here we have prisoners making the adobe bricks outside of the east wall, and then right here these are prisoners inside of the east wall, and then also shops building at the right. So kind of what we're looking at here, let's kind of see if we can find some of that. It's probably in this section right over here now. But guys, we were totally right. That was adobe. That is awesome. And it says here that the actual wall around the prison was 18 feet tall, and it was all made of adobe. So the prisoners were physically making the adobe, which was building the wall around them. Crazy. But that's the prison labor system for you. And inside here also you'll see there are string lights pretty much everywhere. And while I'm sure that that probably has to do with just making the property nice now, originally this area would have in fact been a benefactor of those original lights. So that's kind of, I'm sure, why they wanted to keep them in place. A few other things that are a little bit more visible from up here, you can see that the area that we came in through that had the actual prison fight, that is covered right now. They're trying to work on that and it's protecting the structure a bit. I noticed at the back they're having a little bit of decay, so they're working to renovate. That's super cool. And then you can see just the beauty of the grounds while we're up here too. They have some very nice landscaping done. They've worked very hard here to make sure that this is an enjoyable space for us all to come and visit. They even have a little bit of a green space. Since the guard tower is the last stop today on our tour around the Yuma Territorial Prison, it's kind of interesting to see the facts that are here about it. For example, the guard tower was actually built on top of water tanks. They did this because they were trying to prevent excessive amount of evaporation. That just goes to show that you truly don't know what you're going to find whenever you're adventuring in any state, let alone in one that has such a cool Old West history. In fact, this particular territorial prison has some ties to the Tombstone area. And Tombstone, we all know, was the wild, wild west. But yeah, kind of cool to come here, check it out, see the differences that have been made since I was here last. And I hope that you guys have enjoyed coming along with me to visit the Yuma Territorial Prison. Remember guys, we are not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time, and today certainly was that, and I'm glad you came with me. Till next time guys, bye!